right before I got up was actually about a year ago. Our weather prognosticators were predicting this apocalyptic event on the East Coast. You may remember, as sometimes happens, it didn't quite become the thing that they thought it was going to become. But I love the focus, because what you heard the mayor of the city of New York say is take care of one another. Look out for your neighbor. Check on them. Care about them. If you remember a year or so ago, we talked about this whole thing of neighboring. And we challenged you to get to know the person next door to you or across the street. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but the temptation is to think, well, this is kind of a lightweight subject. Is we could be talking about the more important things like justification by faith, or the grace of God, which are these huge theological, ideas in Scripture. But when you look at the Gospels and you go to the primary source and you bring in the big guns being like Jesus, and you listen to what he has to say, this is what he had to say. This parable. One day an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him a question. Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? Not, starting with, what's your understanding of it? The man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. So we talked about that a little bit last week, with all your strength, with all your mind. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Right, Jesus told him, do this and you will live. The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? When we drill into this a little bit, one of the things we know is this story is about this lawyer who has a real heartfelt question. I think he's honest and sincere when he goes to this primary source, Jesus, to see what this rabbi has to say, this authority. Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? In other words, what do I have to do to please God? What do I have to do? How do I have to do this faith for it to be right? I think all of us want to know that question. And we ask it of ourselves from time to time. I know going to worship must be the key, right? Well, you know what means? Let's go on a little further and see what it means. The question's asked, and Jesus does this great Jesus teaching thing. This method is when the question's asked of him, what Jesus does is he asks a question back. He said, you've studied the law, you know the law. What does it say? And the lawyer quotes the law, and he says, according to the law, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, congratulations, you've answered rightly, correctly. And then Jesus says, do this, and you will live. Notice what Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say memorize this, does he? He doesn't say believe this set of ideas, these doctrines. That's not what he says. Jesus says, do this, get busy, take action, do this and you will live. Love God and love others. And interestingly, in all four of the Gospels, the same question is asked in different places. But what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus answers exactly the same in all of the Gospels. The greatest commandment is this, to love God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength and mind, to love everyone love your neighbor as yourself. All the law hangs and all the prophets hang on this. These two commandments, loving God and loving your neighbor, Jesus takes all of Christianity, in essence, and hangs it on these two things, these two statements. We understand that the culture and the religious system of Jesus' day is the way they had interpreted and expanded the law. There were actually 613 laws that were essentially thou shalt nots. Thou shalt nots. That was essentially the system, the Jewish religious system of the day. If you go to Israel today and you're going through and enjoying everything and you're going to the shuk down in the old city and you're shopping and you come up to Friday, starting about 2:33, things start shutting down, and before it gets dark, before the sun goes down on Friday, which is their Sabbath, beginning of Sabbath, every store is closed. You go to the hotel, and there's a Gentile elevator, usually, and then there's the Jewish elevator, and the Jewish elevator, you don't punch the button. Did I tell you about there's 613 rules, laws? If you're a Jew, the elevator door opens and you step in. You don't punch a button, it closes, it goes to the next floor up. It opens, it closes, goes to the next floor up. You may be going to the 8th floor. You're going to be doing that all the way up till you get to the floor you want to go to. 613 rules. Thou shalt nots. Jesus took all of that and simplified it and condensed it down to not more thou shalt nots. He condensed it down to 2 thou shalls. Thou shalt love God and thou shalt love each other. And Jesus is implying this is what is essential to the Christian life. This is what is important, to love God through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to the point that that seeps into my life and changes my heart and transforms me to the point that I am able to love you, Gail, Robert, Trevor, John, Jimmy. That I am so with Christ that it changes me where I can love you. Thou shalt. There was a Harvard professor that did some original research. His name is Robert Putnam, and he did a survey involving 500,000 people over an extended span of time and wrote a book over his research, and the title of the book is called Bowling Alone. And what Robert Putnam observed is that from where, several years ago to now, it used to be, and let me say, our idea today is because of technology that we must be more connected. We've got texting, we've got all these other ways of talking, we've got iPhones, we've got emails and all kinds of ways. But one of the things he discovered in his research is we're not more connected, we're more distant from one another. We're increasingly more disconnected from family and from friends than we've been in the past. And how many of us can honestly say that we really know our physical neighbor across the street or next door? It used to be that people joined clubs and groups and organizations in the past. I can remember growing up, we lived out in the country, we had to drive, it was an effort to get into town. My mother was a part of all kinds of groups, Mother's Club and church groups and all of those. I was with some friends the other day, and a great guy, Keith Haygood, is the music director at First Baptist Church, and I was talking to Keith, and he said, yeah, tomorrow night, there's a high school friend of mine who grew up together, Mike Johnson, and he knows that Mike and I grew up together, and Keith said, I'm going over to Mike's tomorrow night. Keith used to direct the music down in Moore, and Mike goes to church there, and I said, what are y'all going to do? He said, we're going to have dinner together, and then we're going to play cards. And I thought, man, I hadn't done that in forever. Just gotten together with some friends, just play cards. It used to be, well, Robert Putnam says that bowling in America is at an all-time high. It's really popular. A lot of people like to do it. We've got some new bowling alleys here in Oklahoma City area. But the number of bowling leagues is at an all-time low. Is because we bowl alone. We're not with groups. When I talk about neighbor, we have to think about who is really my neighbor. I'm not talking about when we're coming home from work and we're in our neighborhood and we're driving down the street and somebody in our neighborhood's out in the front yard and we wave at them on our way home to the dinner we won't have together. What we tend to do is we make this neighbor thing an abstraction instead of a way of life. I've got preacher friends that I talk to occasionally, and I probably need to talk to them more often. But I was talking to this friend the other day, and he said this, "You know, I love humanity. It's the people I don't like." And I'm sure he was going through a struggle in his church, as we sometimes do, and he didn't really mean that. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. But I think the implication is that what happens to us sometimes is we can love people in theory and not in reality. The philosophy of loving people, being a neighbor, becomes an abstraction, not a reality. We're humanitarians. We like to give our money. We'll give some time, some sweat equity to people that maybe we'll never meet. I got a call from Sam Powers this week. He's the pastor at First Methodist here in Edmond, and he said, "We're thinking about issuing a challenge to New Covenant and Acts 2 and the three churches going together to have a competition during the 6 weeks of Lent for Skyline." And as we talked about it, Sam said, "I think we'll end up, our Skyline month," and I haven't talked to the missions team or the ad council about this yet, so if you're on those, don't panic. We'll send out an email this week about it. But the idea is we'll collect more food if we do it as a competition. We'll collect more items for Skyline Ministry, which is a ministry to the poor in the inner city of Oklahoma City. Our month is usually May, our Skyline month, which means if we do that competition, we would not necessarily do it in May. But that's up to missions and ad council. But the thing I thought of is we do that, we make a big effort, and probably none of you have ever been to Skyline. None of you will ever see the people that receive the generosity of your kindness. And I appreciate your kindness. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is Jesus says, and he asks us, who is our neighbor? And for us to think about it, and not neighbor as an abstraction, but neighbor in a concrete, specific way, not generally, but specifically, not loving people in theory. Because loving our neighbor, and the way Jesus is talking about it in this parable about the guy in the ditch, is messy, isn't it? And it's inconvenient, isn't it? Isn't it inconvenient? I mean, these religious leaders that were passing by were probably thinking, if I go help this guy, I will not be religiously pure, and I'll have to go through the ritual purification. I won't be able to go to Jerusalem to go to the temple and do all the things that I need to do, like come into worship. And so it was just too inconvenient. It's too messy. But Jesus says to love our neighbor, and the neighbor is the person sometimes in front of us. It's the person struggling that lives next door. It's the student in the classroom that's having a hard time. It's the person that's sitting in the pew with us. Who is my neighbor? The second thing Jesus says, after the lawyer answers, Jesus says to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live. The whole solution to what Jesus is saying to the lawyer's question is this: do this. It's not built around an abstraction or a philosophy about neighboring or about, somebody we never know or never meet. It's actually doing an action. It's actually doing something when we encounter that opportunity to be a neighbor. And I got to tell you, I am burdened with this. I am convicted all the time. It was a busy week this week. I worked down here. Bev was gone to help the kids in Tulsa, and I worked down here till about 8:30, 9 o'clock Thursday night, and I didn't get finished. Friday is my day off, and I was going to go to Tulsa to take the grandkids to the Chili Bowl. I'd never been to the Chili Bowl. Have any of y'all ever been to that thing? It is crazy. That thing is crazy. It's amazing. Anyway, I won't go too far down that road. I worked down here Thursday night till about 9. I thought, I've got to come back in Friday and finish writing my sermon. So I came back in. I didn't get away from the office till 5 Friday afternoon. No, not literally. I drove to Tulsa, took the boys to the Chili Bowl. Scott had a meeting. I'm busy, you're busy, we've got agendas, we've got things to do. And this thing about who my neighbor is just in front of us all the time. And even the danger of me preaching on this puts this whole concept into the category of theory, because all you're doing is hearing me speak these words. I saw this video, and I want to share this with you because I think it takes this idea of neighboring from an abstraction to a specific. Let's watch this.
March 22nd, 2015. Somehow through this crazy ride called cancer, God decided to use me. So weird. Why? Why would he choose me? I'll probably never know why, but the more challenging question is why not me? I guess first I have to go back to the beginning of all of it, back to August 7th, the day I got the confirmation phone call that I had stage 3 invasive triple-negative breast cancer. This tumor was somehow bringing to the surface all the circles of people around me. So at this point in my journey, God is showing up to me. That's awesome. I am thankful for all he is doing to show me that he is with me every step of this. But then I hear a sermon and everything changes. I get a paradigm shift. God is using all these people to help me and show me love and friendship and support. But that day at church, what I heard was, okay, all these people are meeting your needs, but what are you doing?
Out of this deal. So, this is one area that God has given me a circle. And these ladies, we talk about the effect on our relationships, the effect on our bodies, the effect on just every part of life that this has. And they become blessings to me, and God has a real plan in each of our lives to the story that he's given all of us. So.
But God showed me the new group I now belong to, Cancerites. Yep, those of us walking down a road we didn't choose to be on, but nonetheless walking together once we discovered we shared the same destination. Somehow God chose to give me a new circle with whom I can share Jesus.
And we're kind of stuck with each other, and I said, I'm so thankful that, and I stopped and I thought, I'm almost to the point where I can say I'm thankful that I got breast cancer, because I've met her, I've met lots of other people. I'm this close. I'm not quite able to say I'm thankful I got cancer, but I'm thankful that I've been given an opportunity to meet people and grow and share and just experience something I never would have.
Anywhere you look, there are people hurting, and people need to hear the story of Jesus. I just happen to be thrown in the middle of a seriously needy group. So if we are to each go where we are needed and reach out to those who are searching, I hope next time it's someone at my kid's ball game instead of at a cancer treatment facility. But this is where God is putting me, and I should go. My good news is that I have Jesus. My responsibility is to do what I can to make sure my circles do too.
The ringing of the bell was the last day of her treatment. She moves us from being in an abstraction, a philosophy, to the specific, to the real. Tiffany is just one category, one person who is the victim of cancer, who received a lot of care, to the person that heard Jesus in a very concrete way, a call to be a neighbor, to all those people that she was encountering in that thing that she was struggling with. I'm just saying to you guys that there's a jillion categories. There's people who need us to be a neighbor. And it's not always easy, and it's not convenient. It's messy, takes time, sometimes costs money. Everything Jesus did hangs on this. And he says, do this. Do this and you will live. Tiffany's been in remission for the last few months, and last week she got bad news. You can pray for her. She's from Oklahoma, and that story's real. I invite the worship team to come, and I invite you